Hi, I'm Reed, this is Crowland Publishing, and today we're going to talk about Spelljammer. Beloved 2nd edition AD&D setting. It might be the best D&D setting ever, actually. It's certainly my favourite, except it's not very good. So the basic idea is that it's D&D, it's in the Age of Sail, so the 1700s, pirates, privateers, treasure-seeking, all that sort of stuff, but in space. That sounds like a bit of a curate's egg, doesn't it? Because it's not quite pirates, it's not quite science fiction and space fantasy. We can reimagine it, we're going to reimagine it. Now the first big problem, of course, is at the Age of Sail in space. It doesn't really work, it's not D&D. If you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean or Master and Commander or any of the 1950s kind of really cool pirate ships, you'll see that it's all swashbuckling, it's guns, it's cannons, it's that sort of stuff, and that's not really the high fantasy aesthetic of D&D. The Elven Navy are all in epaulets and bicorn hats, they all have stiff British accents, 50 lashes for Mr. Martigan, that sort of stuff. The spaceships are mainly Earth sailing ships, from galleys to Viking longboats. Now, personally, I love it, but it hasn't aged well. It doesn't play up to the strengths of D&D as recreating medieval era fantasy. And basically it's very, very old-fashioned, and it hasn't aged as well as you would hope. So that all has to change. So, first of all, I think that we just really need to reimagine the aesthetic. It has to be magic tech in nature. It looks more modern. We give the plate mail looking more like 40k Space Marines, not as big and bulky. We give them we make them looking like, say, those cool reimaginings of Jedi that you see all the time in concept art and video games, and all the spin-offs where they have the cool armor and stuff, and they have the cool swords, and you can reflavor crossbows or whatever as mana guns or something, and have them shoot lasers or magical blasts. That's how I do it, and it works really, really effectively, just describing armor and weapons and ships as looking not high-tech, but just a different aesthetic than pirates in space. Similarly, we need to reimagine spelljammers, spaceships. Now, a spelljammer can be anything, but they're often just regular spaceships, sloops and man-of-wars and all that sort of stuff. But inside them is something called a spelljammer helm. Now, it's a throne that you sit on, and if you've got spell slots, you can power the ship to move through space. No spell slots, no movements. No one in the party wants to be a caster? Sad trombone sound. Fight going on above deck? Sorry, ship's pilot, you're out of the action. Cool evasive maneuvers to be done? Everyone else, go over smoke, and the DM and the player will sort out the rest. So you've already got that classic kind of virtual reality problem in that it takes one player deeply out of the action and removes them from the group, and that's never good. And on top of that, I really do think that the imagery of sloops and ships with sails and stuff flying through space, again, I like it, but I just don't think it's as cool as what it used to be. It might have been cool to guys who were born in the 1940s and the 1950s, but it just hasn't aged well. So personally, I think that we need to get rid of helms. I mean, it needs to all be magic tech. The ship might need a crystal ball to navigate. Some ships might run on hit points, blood, death, sacrifices. Some might run on spells, sure, and you might have spare scrolls to stash. Some you might just need to be skilled at using. I would highly recommend that you bring in some fuel, because that's always a fascinating kind of adventure to have. And then we need to just reimagine the entire thing to look just much more modern. Not ballistas anymore, gigantic magical wands as cannons, shooting lightning, acid, fire. A much more Final Fantasy kind of aesthetic. Something that just looks of the now, not of the 1960s. And decentralizing the ship's controls is really going to be an important part of the reimagining. Get rid of the helms, or at least completely reimagine the helms, because you don't want to make a PC punishingly central. The engine room will need to be updated. You'll need to have Scotty down there going like, "You can't take it anymore, Captain." Nonsense. You'll need navigation, should be specialty. You'll need repairs going on. Artificers needs to be down there hammering stuff together. Shooting guns needs to be something that is done by people. You don't want to have a central computer. You don't want any kind of automation. You need to give people lots of stuff to do, especially during cool ship-to-ship combats, and make all these elements expensive to maintain. Space opera is often motivated by, if we don't make this run, if we don't take this dodgy job, we can't replace the motor. So have fuel expensive, have guns, have weapons, have cannons difficult and hard to replace. And it also means that you've always got something interesting to go for your PCs. They can always go, well, I want to have a new engine. I want to have a new gun. It's just an inbuilt kind of plot engine, which takes away a lot of the hassle from DMs. Now, Spelljammer also uses a weird hyperspace analogy called phlogiston, which is like a fiery subspace, warp space, hyperspace rivers. It's complicated, it's not very interesting, it's fiddly, it's in a new addition to the D&D multiverse and the D&D cosmology that you don't need. I personally don't feel that you need to keep space necessarily as this enormous vast sea, so I don't use hyperspace in my D&D, but it's very popular and it's a big trope of science fiction and space fantasy, so I get rid of phlogiston completely. I think it's just stupid and it's a nightmare to figure out, and it adds a whole level of complexity. So what I do if I do use hyperspace is that I tend to make it so that you travel through D&D planes, and that the more dangerous the plane that you're nipping into, the quicker that you go. So if you go into astral space, that's easy. You triple your speed. Easy, no big deal, nothing's really going to happen to you. If you go through abyss space, you might go at 10 times the speed, but there's a very, very real chance that you're going to have a 40k style incursion from the warp, from chaos is going to attack you. So that's how I do it. And I'd really embrace more of, again, the D&D-isms within the actual kind of physical universe of the Spelljammer. The stars are not big balls of plasma, they are huge gates to elemental planes. Sometimes things come out. High Unicron, High Galactus. Black stars are gates to the void that bathe whole worlds in necromantic energies, so that some solar systems are just 10 billion whites, 10 billion vampires, and the lich lords of the Kentaris sector, that sort of stuff. And D&D really, 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 and has for many, many years, needed a much more robust set of flying combat rules and space combat rules and 3D flying rules as well. It really does need a competent, easy and simple to use space combat system. Although I have used Stars Without Numbers, it's really quite effective. It is for OSR games, but it's very, very easy to adapt to 5e. Sign Nominee Publishing, Kevin Crawford, he is a genius. So those are the two big things that I would shift immediately. We really do need to rethink the aesthetic. We need to move way more towards space fantasy. We really do need to rethink what actual spaceships would look like in a D&D kind of space fantasy. And we need to think about the political situation of Spelljammer, because at the moment, it's a big soggy mess. So the Elven Navy, they're kind of like the main big bad. They're the cops, they're the guys who bust you when you're doing piracy and smuggling, but they're not really the big baddies. There's some super orcs called the Scro, but they're not really the big baddies either. There's some Slaver Neogi, but they're not really the big baddies either. So we really do need to have a few more focused threats and antagonists. Now I personally always have an empire or a corporation or a religion that controls most of space. Financially, politically, economically, I make it openly evil as well. And it's important to make it openly sort of malevolent and controlling and authoritarian, because that positions the PCs who go up against it as inherently roguishly heroic, which is exactly what you want. That's what fictional pirates are. That's what Age of Sail fiction is. That's what the Guardians of the Galaxy do. That's what Firefly does. That's what the Rebel Alliance does. I also keep a racial element to their villainy as well. So, say you've got a Minotaur space empire. Only Minotaurs enjoy the full rights of citizenship within the empire. And there's two reasons for this. One, again, it makes them seem more evil quite easily. And it contrasts with the broad racial diversity that almost all adventuring parties are going to have. And that continues the long-standing Age of Sail trope of great amounts of diversity. Have a look at pirate ships. There's guys from all around the world serve on pirate ships, get on quite well with one another. And again, have a look Guardians of the Galaxy. It's a ragtag group of misfits from all around the universe, and an authoritarian empire is a fantastic bad guy for almost all kinds of space fantasy. But this is D&D. We have a lot of different kinds of genres that we can emulate, and I do think that we need to have more specialty threats. I have a very, very great many ideas on this, but for now, we will just do one, and that's going to be Aberrations, who are big bad guys in Spelljammer Original as well. These are the aliens. These are the cosmic mutants, things from irradiated hell planets, born in the darkness of the stars. Vast beholders, lobotomized and grown to huge, vast sizes that come to a world's atmosphere and invade. Maybe they even burst open like some horrific sporulation. Maybe they just try to eat your planet because they're as big as the moon. Horrible freeholds where mind flayers buy slaves and no one ever sees them used for labor. Katori war fleets that defile space with pus from their living worm vessels. Going into abomination space is like entering into a horrific alternate universe where space stuff itself is made of fevers and space-time is infected and disgusting. This is the space horror stuff that you want. And Wizards also really does need to reimagine the adventures that Spelljammer offers. It needs to have more of a unique D&D spin, because the second edition adventures, they're boring, they don't really feel like fantasy and space to me, and they don't emulate the fun tropes of space opera. And especially with these more experimental genres and subgenres, you really do need to give your DM a good, strong guidance. Here is an adventure, here is what a game can look like in this particular world. Really embrace those tropes and really build adventures around them. Space warlords and recurring baddies are fantastic, from Ming of Mongo to the Hands of Blue. Want to run into the Cronin the Accuser? Cool, no big deal. He's a cleric. Darth Vader's a conquest pally, level 20. I always just use 40k orcs for my orcs. Hello, steady there, Mr. Nailbrain. We see you've got a pretty ship, that sort of stuff. Shadakai can be Romulans, Hobgoblins are Klingons, Formians are Borgs. Use a Displacer Beast stats for alien-style, tense encounters, Slard at higher levels. Let an Atropal be Galactus. Use Krakens like that bit in Solo. Reimagine Drow as Firefly Reavers. Let Thanos be a Space Fiend or an Empyrean. Recreate what people love about space opera, but with D&D twists. And again, embrace D&D-isms by bringing out those lesser used baddies that you might have a hard time finding use for in regular campaigns. Make your clockwork horrors as robotic menaces like inhibitors from Revelation Space, or Daleks, dragon corpses turned into ships by dark vampire fleets that rarely and only with great effort can leave their black hole systems. A ship may drop a payload of basilisk bombs during combat. I did that once, it was bloody hilarious. Spellcasters summoning fire elementals onto the decks of wooden ships, rust monsters for metal ones. You can really get into space fantasy and have very, very different kind of space opera if you try. And I think that Wizards of the Coast really do need to move towards what makes D&D a special game different from a movie. And finally, just drop the goofy stuff. Spelljammer has a bad reputation for a whole bunch of silly, billy, goof around nonsense, and I don't like it. No friggin' tinker gnomes making ships out of junk and rubber bands. They are not funny, they are dumb, they are cartoonish, and they break the mood. No giant space hamsters, no hippo men with guns. An old man being silly does not comedy make. Funny don't draw money. Please don't do it. So, Spelljammer. Despite the fact that I've complained about it for the last 10 minutes, I actually love it. I think it's loads of fun. It is my first pitch to almost any new group if they come to me and they say, let's play D&D. But it's old. It's silly, it's just goofy, but its worst thing is that it just has not kept up with modern gaming practices, and it has not reflected the generic and narrative interests of a new generation of gamers. So, reimagine though, I think, and it doesn't have to be my way, but just reimagine definitely has to happen. And suddenly Wizards will have a unique, huge sandbox, endlessly exciting setting that will please not only space opera fans, but fantasy fans as well. There you go. Thanks for listening. I'm Reed. Why don't you give it a like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. And stand by next week when I reimagine Dragonlance. I'm just kidding, because Dragonlance is shit.